The Salem Witch Trials, which took place in colonial Massachusetts between early 1692 and mid-1693, are a story of paranoia, sexism, and injustice that ultimately resulted in more than 200 people being accused of practicing witchcraft, of which 20 were executed. The witch trials were fueled by religious extremism among the Puritan settlers, as well as social unrest, including various feuds between many families in Salem. While most people in the United States have likely at least heard of the Salem Witch Trials, there are tons of crazy details about how they unfolded that many people are unaware of. In this video, we'll take a close look at the cultural causes of the trials, exactly why and how they unfolded, as well as a mind-blowing potential explanation for the strange behavior of some of the accused. Let's dive in. Throughout history, Christianity was one of the many large religions that taught that the devil could grant special powers to people known as witches that enabled them to harm others in return for their loyalty. This belief ultimately catalyzed a witchcraft craze that rippled through Europe from the 1300s to the end of the 1600s. Throughout this period, tens of thousands of women were accused of witchcraft and were ultimately executed. While the Salem Witch Trials occurred just as the European craze was winding down, local circumstances explained why this happened in Salem when it did. In 1689, English monarchs William and Mary declared war with France in the American colonies. To colonists, this conflict was known as King William's War, which ravaged regions of upstate New York, Nova Scotia, and Quebec, resulting in refugees settling into the county of Essex and, more specifically, Salem Village. These displaced people placed a strain on Salem's limited resources, which aggravated an existing rivalry between families with ties to the wealth of the port of Salem and those who still primarily depended on agriculture. Plus, controversy arose over Salem Village's first ordained minister in 1689, Reverend Samuel Parris, who had a reputation as a rigid, greedy man. Ultimately, the Puritan villagers attributed all of this conflict to the work of the devil, leaving Salem primed for an irrational, paranoid descent into what became known as the Salem Witch Trials. In January 1692, the daughter and niece of the aforementioned Reverend Samuel Parris started having so-called fits. The two girls, Elizabeth Parris, age 9, and Abigail Williams, age 11, would suddenly start screaming, throwing things, uttering bizarre sounds, and contorting their bodies in unusual positions. A local doctor in Salem blamed their fits on the supernatural, implying that the devil had influenced these girls or that they'd been possessed by evil. Soon after, 12-year-old Anne Putnam Jr. of Salem began having similar episodes. Then, on February 29th, under pressure from local magistrates, colonial officials put the girls on trial. I'm sure the three girls were incredibly scared and confused about what was going on, and ultimately they blamed three women for afflicting them. Tituba, a female Caribbean woman enslaved by the Parris family, a homeless beggar named Sarah Good, and an impoverished elderly woman named Sarah Osborne. Starting on March 1st, 1692, all three of the women blamed by the young girls were brought before local magistrates and interrogated for several days. Osborne denied the charges of witchcraft and maintained her innocence, as did Good. The Parris family's slave Tituba, however, confessed. She said, "The devil came to me and bid me serve him." She also claimed that there were several other witches looking to destroy the Puritans of Salem, likely to get some of the focus and pressure off of her. This false confession exasperated the fears already present within Salem, and paranoia spread like wildfire, with a stream of accusations following over the next few months. Once a loyal member of the local church named Martha Corey was accused, the community became even more concerned. If she could be a witch, the community reasoned, then anyone could. As a result, even Good's 4-year-old daughter was questioned on suspicion of witchcraft, and her timid, unclear responses were misconstrued as a confession. Dozens of people were brought in for questioning. Then, on May 27, 1692, Governor William Phips established a special court for the trial of accused witches. An older woman named Bridget Bishop, who was known for gossip and so-called promiscuity, was the first accused witch to be brought in front of the special court. She denied the charges of witchcraft, but she was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to death. On June 10th, she became the first person hanged on what was later called Gallows Hill. Since it's obviously very difficult to prove in court that an accused person is actually a witch, many unfair practices were employed to convict them, including forcing false confessions out of the accused, as well as the use of what's called spectral evidence to make someone seem guilty of witchcraft. Spectral evidence usually involves testimony about dreams, visions, or other supernatural phenomena, none of which is supported with any real physical evidence. So, when the aforementioned special court was established to try the accused witch, a respected minister named Cotton Marr wrote a letter imploring the court not to allow the use of spectral evidence to convict someone accused of witchcraft. The court largely ignored this request, and in July of 1692, 5 more people were sentenced to death by hanging, followed by 5 more in August and 8 in September. Then, on August 3rd, the president of Harvard and father of that respected minister followed in his son's footsteps by denouncing the use of spectral evidence. He was quoted as saying, "It were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than 1 innocent person be condemned." Then, Governor Phipps, who was responsible for creating the special court to try suspected witches in the first place, found out that his own wife was questioned as a suspected witch. In response to that accusation, as well as the pleas of many in the community to disavow spectral evidence, Governor Phipps finally prohibited further arrest and released many accused witches. Perhaps when his own wife was accused of witchcraft, he finally realized how out of hand this whole situation had gotten. Then, on October 29th, Governor Phipps dissolved the special court and replaced it with a superior court of judicature, which did not allow spectral evidence and convicted just 3 out of 56 defendants. By May of 1693, Governor Phipps had finally pardoned all those imprisoned on charges of witchcraft. Unfortunately, though, the damage was already done. 19 men and women were hanged on Gallows Hill, and 1 man was even slowly crushed to death with large stones after refusing to submit to a trial. Additionally, at least 5 of the accused passed away in jail. The jails the accused were kept in were essentially nothing more than torture chambers. The walls were made of jagged brick-like rocks and the floor was covered in dirt. Someone would periodically enter your cell, strip you naked, and examine your entire body, poking and prodding in search of any marks or bruises that might indicate an affiliation with the devil. Spending month after month in this empty hellhole would drive anyone insane, leaving them with a stain of everlasting trauma, and many were never the same even after they were released. Even animals weren't exempt from unfounded accusations, as colonists in Salem Village killed 2 dogs that they believed were linked to the devil. When it was all said and done, over 200 people were accused of witchcraft during the Salem Witch Trials. Thankfully, in the years following the Salem Witch Trials, many of those involved publicly confessed error and guilt, such as Judge Samuel Sewell and accuser Ann Putnam. Then, on January 14, 1697, a day of fasting and soul-searching over the tragedy of Salem was ordered by the Massachusetts General Court. While it's obviously nice to see that some of those involved tried to take accountability for their mistakes, ultimately nothing can undo the loss of innocent life. In 1702, about a decade after the witch trials, the court officially declared the trials unlawful, and in 1711, a bill was passed that restored the rights and good names of many of the accused, and granted a total of £600 in restitution to their heirs, which is equivalent to over $100,000 in 2023. More than 250 years later, in 1957, the state of Massachusetts formally apologized for the events of 1692. However, it wasn't until July of 2022 that the final victim of the Salem Witch Trials was officially pardoned, and the way her name was finally cleared will likely surprise you. The way this happened is pretty crazy, and demonstrates that it really is never too late to right a historical wrong. It turns out that a woman named Elizabeth Johnson Jr., who was convicted of witchcraft during the trials in Salem, had never been officially exonerated. Not much is known about her life, but she may have had developmental issues, and she didn't have any close family to fight to clear her name. Apparently, Elizabeth did try to clear her own name when in 1712, years after the Salem Witch Trials, she petitioned Salem to be exonerated and included in the list of those accused who received restitution. Nobody knows why her request was ignored. Then, over 300 years later, an 8th grade civics teacher in Massachusetts named Carrie LaPierre came across the story of Elizabeth. Together with her students, LaPierre spent years petitioning Massachusetts to exonerate Elizabeth Johnson. Then, finally, justice came in the form of a brief addition to the 2023 state budget, and Elizabeth's name was finally officially cleared by the state. This made Elizabeth the final accused witch to be cleared of wrongdoing. Obviously, the Salem Witch Trials were a horrible chapter in colonial history, and nothing could ever make up for the damage that was done. But LaPierre and her class did everything they could to restore the good name of that final forgotten victim of history. One of the more fascinating hypotheses that's been proposed to explain the strange behavior of some of those accused of witchcraft is the Ergot Hypothesis. Ergot is a fungus that can contaminate rye, used for rye bread. Ergot contains a hallucinogenic tryptamine called LSA, or lysergic acid amide, which is a close relative of the well-known psychedelic LSD, or lysergic acid diethylamide, commonly known as acid. The following is a diagram of the biosynthetic pathway to LSA as observed in ergot, starting from the common amino acid L-tryptophan, for those with some interest in organic chemistry. The psychedelic effects of ergot-contaminated rye bread could potentially explain the bizarre behavior observed, especially in the young girls who were the first to be accused of witchcraft. While it's not likely that every person accused of witchcraft was under the influence of ergot-contaminated rye bread, as simple panic and paranoia can spread like wildfire in a tight-knit, religious community like Salem without the need of any chemical agents, this hypothesis is still a fascinating one. Much research has been done on the topic, and the Ergot hypothesis is definitely controversial. Many experts will call it unlikely, but others defend it rigorously. Unfortunately, we'll probably never know for sure. The Salem Witch Trials are a shameful stain on the history of America as a whole. The way that religious paranoia spread throughout Salem and was utilized to justify subjecting the accused to horrendous, life-ruining conditions is something we as a society thankfully seem to learn from, at least to some degree, as we now collectively view the trials as an example of the dangers of religious fanaticism and mob rule. The trials are also seen as a warning against the excesses of puritanism and help to shape the more secular and rationalist views that would come to define American culture in the following centuries. But we as a nation still have a long way to go in our ever-shifting, constant quest towards the betterment of society in this experiment we call America. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and let me know in the comments below, and subscribe to my channel for more content. Also, if there's any particular topic you'd like to see me cover in a future video, I'd love to hear about it. Anyway, thanks for watching.